Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this Basis Technologies webinar in our ongoing series of webinars about all things relating to DevOps and test automation for SAP in particular. My name is Peter Yabsley. I run product marketing here at Basis Technologies. As part of that role, I spend a lot of my time talking to SAP users about how automation helps them to drive agility and efficiency in their core business systems. And to illustrate that topic, Basis Technologies recently commissioned Forrester Consulting to create a total economic impact study about ActiveControl, our SAP DevOps automation software. And it's that study we're going to be talking about in today's session, as you can see on the screen here. To that end, I am delighted to introduce my guest speaker in today's session, who's actually by far the most important person in today's webinar, and that's Mary Barton, the Forrester consultant who authored the Total Economic Impact Study for us. Mary, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Sure, Pete, I'm glad to be here. Good day, everybody.
Just got to do a little bit of webinar admin before we get on with the session, as we normally do. First of all, everybody will notice that you're on mute on the call today. But if you do have any questions as we go through, we'd encourage you to enter those in the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A there. As always, with our Basis Technologies webinars, this is a recorded session. So if you'd like to get the link at the end of it, we'll be sending that by email. If you don't receive that within the next day or two, do please get in touch. You can do that via our website. There'll be some details at the end as well. You may have noticed we've had a couple of slight technical issues on the visual side of things here today. So we're going a little bit retro today. We're not going to have any video feed. But of course, Mary and I will be here speaking to you throughout the session. So without further ado, let's move on, and let's just, for anyone on the call who maybe isn't quite so familiar with Basis Technologies, just quickly introduce who we are and set the scene for the Total Economic Impact Study we're going to be talking about. So at Basis Technologies, we create software automation that helps our customers to change the way they manage, adapt, and maintain their SAP systems. We do that by helping them to bring concepts like DevOps and continuous delivery into SAP through our DevOps and test automation platform that is specifically engineered for the architecture of those SAP systems. And we've been doing this a long time now, founded nearly 25 years ago, and really we're SAP experts. Our products are only designed to work in SAP, that's all we do. And as you can see on the screen, we have a global presence, offices all around the world, supporting a wide range of SAP users with large and small estates in many well-known brands, and you can see some on the screen there. And what we're here to talk about today is part of that DevOps and test automation platform. We're going to be looking specifically at ActiveControl, our DevOps automation solution, which goes alongside with Testimony, our regression testing solution in this overall platform. And just to click in, for anyone with us today who isn't completely familiar with what ActiveControl is and what it does, I just want to introduce that briefly. So ActiveControl is a highly sophisticated change automation solution that enables the kind of fast, flexible, safe change and release automation that lets you build continuous integration and continuous delivery processes into SAP and adopt concepts like agile development and DevOps in those SAP environments. And in particular, one of the things that it also allows you to do is integrate that automated SAP development process into your wider enterprise IT application delivery pipelines. One key area that ActiveControl offers support for as well that is very much front of mind for many of the organizations we work with is, of course, S/4HANA transition as well. So we have support within the product to help make that process faster and more efficient and reduce the manual effort there. And we have various different content on our website about that. And importantly, I think in terms of ActiveControl's philosophy of being an agile, flexible, versatile tool, it's something that can be implemented really quite quickly and hopefully therefore deliver a rapid return on your investment and value very quickly, very much in the agile mindset. And of course, it's this very topic that we're really going to be talking about in today's presentation. And this is the high-level summary of what the Forrester Total Economic Impact study found when they looked at the potential value of ActiveControl. And Mary's going to take us through the details of this in a moment, but I just wanted to introduce that high-level overview. And as you can see here, based on Forrester's research and modelling, ActiveControl can potentially be expected to deliver a 245% ROI and a net overall financial saving of $1.24 million over a 3-year period. So really quite powerful outcomes, but actually there's even more benefit on top of that in some other areas, which we'll come on to as well later in the presentation as we talk through what the study found. So at this point, I want to get into the really important part of the presentation and take a closer look at those outcomes I've just talked about and how they were derived from that TEI, that total economic impact process. So let's begin this at the beginning. Mary, I'm going to hand over to you. Can you take us through an introduction to what you're going to cover today, and then through the concept behind Forrester's total economic impact model and how you do those assessments?
Sure. Thanks, Pete. I'm pleased to be your guest here today and present the findings of the total economic impact of Basis Technologies ActiveControl. But before I get started, I just want to make the audience aware of a couple of things. The most important thing is to note that this work was commissioned by Basis Technologies, completed independently by Forrester, which maintains editorial control. The customer names were provided by Basis Technologies, but Basis Technologies did not participate in those interviews. And lastly, Forrester does not endorse Basis Technologies or any other product for that matter. Today, we're going to cover an introduction to what a TEI is. We'll walk through the customer interview journey that I discovered through speaking with Basis Technologies customers. And then we'll talk about the results that Pete just sort of gave you at the high level. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that. One final thing to note, this presentation is an abridged version of the full study. Basis Technologies can provide you with the full study, including the financial tables and methodology. And with that out of the way, let's get to the study. But before we get to the results, I'd like to review what the TEI is. Why is a TEI important? Well, IT leaders are increasingly seeing the need to develop a business use case justification for an investment decision. There are a few ways to do that, of course, from a simple total cost of ownership approach or an ROI analysis. The TEI takes that one step further and puts the ROI in the context of the customer experience, beginning with what brought them to consider the investment in the first place, through to the strategic impact the investment may have had on their organization. We also consider the non-quantifiable benefits as well. Forrester's been conducting TEI studies for over 20 years. The TEI methodology allows us to develop the business use case in a consistent, repeatable way by considering the benefits, the cost, the flexibility, and the risk that an organization sees with their technology investment.
Thanks, Mary. So obviously, just a brief introduction there, but I think important for anyone who's not familiar with this TEI model to sort of understand where that's come from and that it's a very structured and well-established approach. So obviously, quite a holistic model that you're looking at there from Forrester's perspective, trying to get that realistic outcome of what value products can deliver to end users over time. And you've got, I know, quite a structured and rigorous methodology in terms of how you build these studies. Can you share the basic approach of that with our audience before we get into the specifics of the Basis Technology study?
Absolutely. So the approach begins with due diligence. We work with our customers like Basis Technologies to understand the impact that the customer might experience with the investment. We also look to other sources, including Forrester research, the other side of the house here at Forrester. We then interviewed the internal stakeholders at Basis Technologies and reviewed background materials. Then Basis Technologies identified customers for us to speak with, and we independently interviewed those customers. From the information we gather, we then create a composite organization that's representative of those customers, and we apply the data from the interviews to create a 3-year financial model. We write the case study with all of the assumptions and calculations clearly spelled out so that it can be useful to you in developing your own business use case. And again, Basis Technologies was invited to review that while Forrester retained editorial control. Sorry,
thanks, Mary. I was just going to say, so again, we've got this structured approach and very importantly driven by information that you get and the Forrester team gets from actual users, in this case of ActiveControl. Can you take our audience through a bit about who you spoke to for this study, the experience they shared with you, and what kind of composite model that led you to for the ActiveControl study?
Sure. We interviewed 5 Basis Technologies ActiveControl customers. As you can see, they spanned multiple industries and managed differing SAP landscapes on ActiveControl. We spoke with some more senior people at those organizations, and as well as those who are sort of more hands-on with the product. All in all, we spoke with 8 decision makers at the 5 companies. One of the recurring themes that we heard across the ActiveControl users that we spoke to was that prior to adopting ActiveControl, they struggled with big, slow, infrequent releases. The business impact was that by the time the SAP team had created the change, the business stakeholders had already moved on to their next priority and were no longer engaged. In addition to a limited number of deployments, when the releases were made, there was an associated interruption to business operations. Resources were also allocated to slow, inadequate change management documentation. And as you can see here from the quote, that frustration is easily illustrated here. The overarching theme then in finding a solution was to reduce the complexity of changing SAP systems. Interviewees wanted to reduce the effort and build collaborative efforts with stakeholders. They wanted to move to a more DevOps model for SAP like they had engaged in other areas of the business and provide the flexibility to make those frequent incremental changes.
And Mary, I think just one of the things maybe worth clicking on that's mentioned on this slide is, I believe it came up a few times, this question of being able to collaborate better with business owners and the drivers of the changes that the SAP teams were actually delivering. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more in the unquantified benefits as well. But that was something that they felt that with these frequent incremental changes that the business owners and the business stakeholders that they were working with were able to stay more engaged and provide better feedback to the development teams as to what exactly they were looking for.
Thanks.
So the composite organization, most of the interviewed organizations that we spoke with started with a smaller project and grew their capabilities over time. So like the interviewed organization, the composite starts with a few key SAP systems and grows that number over time. Full details can be found in the complete study, but the 250 developers using ActiveControl are responsible for the actual deployments and support 400 business users who access ActiveControl for collaborative development, monitoring, and development approvals. The composite organization chose ActiveControl for several key reasons, beginning with the fact that it could be rapidly deployed at a low cost. It also enabled the organization to immediately dispense with the onerous and inefficient workflows and documentation of the deployment process that they previously used.
Thanks, Mary. And I think this customer journey element in this whole TEI study is really important and interesting there to see that there were definitely a lot of common challenges identified. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they definitely chimed with the kind of feedback we tend to hear. But I think really important to stress again that those interviews that you conducted were private and conducted by the Forrester team without any input or influence, I'm trying to say, from Basis Technologies on that conversation. So real, genuine user feedback going into the study here. Which brings us to So it brings us to, I guess, the really important bit, which is around the outcomes of using ActiveControl and what those interviews brought out to you in terms of user experience. So can you talk us through a bit more detail around those high-level outcomes I showed at the start, that the model predicts the composite organization might expect to see from using ActiveControl?
That's right. We calculate the 3-year impact on the business, and after applying an analysis of all the customer feedback and the data that we gathered from them, we calculated that the impact of ActiveControl on the composite organization was an ROI of 245% with benefits of 1.75 million, yielding a net present value of 1.24 million. And this quote illustrates how implementing ActiveControl positively impacts the workflows and the interactions across an organization. This interviewee described the way that deploying ActiveControl changed the way that organization worked, capturing many of the unquantified benefits that we hear from others. And this really is all about the business impact on the entire organization. The quantified benefits accrued in 3 ways. There was increased speed and efficiency, there was quality improvement and risk reduction, and compliance and reporting savings. And we'll go into more depth on each one of those. First of all, the increased speed and efficiency. This benefit captures the time saved by the SAP team on deployment activities based on the automated ActiveControl processes. Better collaboration with business leaders meant less rework, leading to overall shorter development cycles and faster deployment to production environments. One interviewee said, the less time you can spend on documentation because you have a tool that can take care of that, the more time you have doing the actual work in the system. And so for the composite organization, this benefit resulted in the freeing up of 4.3 full-time equivalents on the SAP team by year 3.
Thanks, Marion. I know, as you've mentioned, as part of this TEI process in today's call, we're not able to talk about the customers that took part by name, but I'd just like to give our audience a quick alternative example of an ActiveControl user that has really seen this speed and efficiency benefit as one of their big gains from using the tool, and that's our customer Vistaprint. It's probably a business that everyone's familiar with, creating really any kind of branded merchandise that you need in a kind of just-in-time model, and very much an e-commerce, a digital native company, started around the turn of the millennium, very successful, but found over the years that success was slowing them down due to their scale, and pivoted a few years back now to really try and focus on making the business overall more agile, including IT, but not just IT. And about 4 or 5 years ago now, SAP really came into focus as part of that agile transformation, and we started to work with the Vistaprint team to help them look at how they could bring an agile approach into SAP, and they adopted ActiveControl to help them do that. And the details, the image and the text you can see on the screen here is actually from a Vistaprint slide where they described with us in a different presentation the outcomes that they'd seen from ActiveControl. And as you can see, again, in the context of this speed and efficiency benefit that we're talking about, Vistaprint are talking about safer, faster, more frequent delivery of change with greater autonomy in their teams, greater productivity, and really importantly, early delivery of value, and this idea of an accelerated concept to cash, getting from idea to working code much more quickly. And Vistaprint are actually in a scenario where they're able to deploy any changes to production on a daily basis now if they're ready to do so. So just a quick example there of an organization that's really seen speed and efficiency, as Mary has mentioned, as one of the big beneficial outcomes of ActiveControl. Mary, I'll hand back to you to talk us through that next category of the 3 that you mentioned.
Sure, this is about quality improvements and risk reduction. And this benefit captures the fact that interviewees reported that with ActiveControl, they can increase the frequency of SAP deployments as well as improve the quality of the deployments. So that improved quality led to a decrease in error rates. The composite organization saw a 90% decrease in post-deployment errors. In fact, some of them reported that it was nearly zero. But additionally, the remediation efforts that were required to address those post-deployment errors took less time to resolve, resulting in a 98.5% reduction in effort to address post-deployment errors. In the full study, we detail the factors that may affect the ability to achieve those same savings so that you can build a more tailored business use case for your organization.
Thanks, Mary. And I think I would expect this certainly to be an outcome that will chime with many of our listeners today. I think there's a general drive for greater speed in many organizations, but quality improvement and risk reduction are certainly close to the heart of many SAP users. And again, I'd just like to give a kind of an example of one ActiveControl user where this was a really key consideration. So this example is a company called RS Components, a large wholesaler of electrical equipment and other goods in the UK, but part of a global group called Electro Components, quite a large company. And they've been using ActiveControl for a while, and they'd certainly seen some benefits of that in a number of different areas. But a couple of years ago, they decided to really focus on this area of quality improvement and risk reduction with a new change governance regime that they wanted to bring in to increase their understanding of the risk of SAP change even more in systems that are really critical to their business, to their daily operations. So they wanted to increase their approval rigor, expose all the information to all the stakeholders, and again, in a kind of a virtuous circle, accelerate their deployments by increasing the quality of what they were changing. And I think the couple of really important outcomes, again, of that, and again, these are some slides that RS Components put together. So these are the outcomes that they've described of using ActiveControl. And as you can see, from a quality perspective, we've got that bullet there, 100% production uptime. So essentially, they've eliminated unplanned production downtime caused by technical problems after deployments. So that's what that means there, and that's a big outcome for RS Components. But it's not just about that safety of systems for them. As you can see on the slide, the ability to increase their governance, have better quality and visibility of change, has also reinforced what we talked about with speed and efficiency in terms of their faster time to value through greater confidence, giving them greater ability through that lower business risk. So I think a good example there of an actual ActiveControl user who's again seeing those specific quality improvement and risk reduction benefits from using ActiveControl. So Mary, back to you to talk about the last three of those key areas.
That's right. This is compliance and reporting savings. Because all of the logs are maintained in ActiveControl, this may seem to be more important to entities that are subject to regulatory oversight, but all of the interviewees reported that they're subject to some type of internal auditing requirements. And with all of the documentation maintained in ActiveControl, responding to those compliance audit requests is just a simple matter of pulling the report from the system. Prior to adopting ActiveControl, responding to such a request meant tracking down email trails, oftentimes months after the fact, and required someone with specific knowledge of the process. Now with ActiveControl, anybody on the team, including a business stakeholder, can just pull the report directly from the system.
Thanks, Mary. And again, just to round this off, a couple more examples to illustrate this point, which although that financial saving in this compliance category may have appeared relatively small compared to the others we've talked about, this is often a really big pain point for the organizations we work with, generating the audit reports that are necessary either for internal or external compliance processes. Unfortunately, I can't name the two customers this time, but these again are real bullet points put together by the end users. So on the left, we've got that category, as Miriam mentioned, that's maybe not specifically constrained by sector regulatory requirements. So this is an e-commerce business, but their finance team was using ActiveControl to manage change in their SAP finance systems, and they really appreciated the removal of the manual effort involved so that they could gain that full legal compliance with the general financial requirements that a lot of businesses face these days with minimal effort. So critically, they could spend more time on real value-add work. And on the right-hand side, an example of a quite heavily regulated industry, again finance, but this time actually in the banking system, a large North American bank. And again, they focused on the fact that standardizing and automating those compliance and audit processes gives them the governance they need, and also gives them more trust and confidence in making those changes to the production systems, knowing that they have a full audit trail at their fingertips there when they do so. So that's a quick illustration of that final point around the direct economic impact that this TEI study predicts ActiveControl can deliver to end users. As Mary's mentioned, we also want to talk briefly about the important topic of what wasn't included in the quantified outcome. So Mary, can you just tell us a little bit about the other areas where the people you spoke to felt they were also getting benefit from ActiveControl?
Oh, sure. The unquantified benefits. And sometimes customers report to us that these actually may have a bigger impact on their business than the ones that we're able to quantify. They know that the interviewees know that these benefits are very real. They just don't have any metrics to measure them. So the improved business continuity, well, we all know that there are some ways to get at that, but in our analysis of the benefit and improved business continuity, we were only able to capture the effect to the SAP team members' time, but not that of the effect on improved customer satisfaction, business operations, and the business stakeholders' time that was also saved. Then the greater alignment with business needs. It's very difficult to measure that. You know that the same is true of greater alignment with business, but there's more adaptive development and improved time to market for business leaders. The increased employee satisfaction kind of takes all of this and wraps it in one, because it's all the things that we've talked about: removal of onerous tasks, improved communications internally, better alignment with the business needs, more rapid, more responsive development leads to increased employee satisfaction. And we find that, especially in talent pools and technical, we all know that that's a tight market. We see a lot better talent retention. And we hear that from anecdotes about improved morale across the organization. But we actually saw a quote earlier in this presentation about a more joyful way of doing business. And the effect of that is just not measurable.
Great, thank you, Mary. I mean, I think personally this is a really important area, as you just mentioned there, for all of these TEI studies, because they really amplify those quantifiable benefits, those hard numbers that we've already got, and add, show that there's even more value to add from a product like ActiveControl. So that brings us to the end of the detailed look at the outcomes of the ActiveControl TEI study, and we're nearly at the end of today's session. Mary, why don't you just wrap this up for us briefly before we just quickly look at some of the questions that have come in the last few minutes of today's session.
Sure. So the other half of the ROI is cost. We have to have some cost to balance against. So the composite incurred costs of just under $500,000 over the 3-year period of this study for their ActiveControl license and implementation costs. So just to summarize again, the ROI, very healthy, 245% for this composite organization with $1.75 million in present value of benefits and a net present value of $1.24 million. And as you can see, that's increasing over time as this organization went to more and more SAP landscapes. And you can read more about it in the full study. Pete, you probably got some information about how people can get that.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, yes, thank you, Mary. Absolutely, you led me on nicely there, because we've got the URL for the report on the screen here. But if you just go to the Basis Technologies homepage at basistechnologies.com, very easy to find your way to accessing that report and being able to download a copy for yourself to look at in detail. Mary, thanks very much for taking us through that overview of how you came to compile this ActiveControl TEI study. We're basically at the end of today's presentation, but let's just take a quick look. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. So let me just take a quick look at those. Okay, so I think this is a fair question. I may have heard this in another session. It says that the model is based on quite a big company. What kind of value would smaller firms get from ActiveControl?
Well, actually, in the first year, the composite organization had ActiveControl deployed on just 4 systems, which would be very small compared to the customers that we spoke with. But even in the first year, we saw a positive return. So I think it's scalable.
Okay, great, thank you. And that's certainly true from our perspective. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we have clients with large and small SAP landscapes who tell us they're getting benefit from using ActiveControl. You mentioned license cost, Mary. I think a fair question here. The question is asked, what costs are the financial savings based on? How did you come to those numbers?
The financial savings, what costs are those based on? I'm sorry, could you clarify?
Yes. So I guess the meaning there is, for example, the $900,000 of speed and efficiency gains. What areas is that derived from? Where are those savings coming from?
That's coming from SAP team members' time, and as we said, that we were only able to capture the time of the SAP team members, not the time of others within the organization.
Okay, great, thanks.
I think we averaged about 6 hours per deployment of savings.
And I think, am I fair to say that Forrester have a kind of fairly standardized cost model for how you calculate the value of people in different types of industry or different roles that feed into this overall model?
Yes, we do. We have an industry average for usually the United States, and then we apply a 35% markup to cover overhead, benefits, all of the things that a person would actually cost the organization to maintain.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple more here. I think you mentioned manual processes. The question said, was anyone you spoke to using another tool prior to ActiveControl, or was it all just spreadsheet based?
Well, some people had developed some sort of semi-automated systems. Some of them were homegrown. I think some people had another third party that they used, but they didn't have the full automation that they were able to achieve with ActiveControl. It still had a lot of manual processes around gathering reports, and those compliance and audit requirements were not really affected very much by those semi-automated systems.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, that's again something that we often see. Obviously, a lot of companies still using manual methods and spreadsheets, but maybe different legacy tools, and obviously ActiveControl has a bit more of a modern and current approach to some of this stuff. Final one here, Mary, which I guess it's kind of got an obvious answer, but maybe more relating to your model. Do Forrester expect the TEI benefits to keep accruing after 3 years? Why is it only that period?
Sure. Well, the 3-year period is standard for us because once we look out past 3 years, it's a little bit too speculative for Forrester to want to report on that. We tend to err on the side of conservative reporting. Yes, I believe, particularly with ActiveControl, because one of the things that you see as the organization grows the number of SAP systems that they're covering, and business stakeholders begin to see the results of being able to work in this iterative, more DevOps model, that sort of the mindset around that follows the skill set. So we see the skill set developed with the SAP developers, but then that mindset of DevOps for SAP systems kind of grows within the organization. And so I think it is, even if our composite had not expanded the number of systems that they were working on, I believe they would have seen increased benefits year over year.
All right, thank you, Mary. I think that's an interesting insight about kind of tools and mindset being a kind of a cycle that feed in each other, and I think that's actually very true in a lot of the IT arena. We do just have one final question, which I will take rather than throwing over to you, because it's not so specifically about the study that we've looked at today. The question is asking about strategies for comparing cost and benefit of different tooling options or different approaches. And I think in terms of, in generalities, obviously we've got some specific outcomes of ActiveControl here, and we'd be more than happy to share a bit about how those have been derived beyond the report, and what our other customers have seen. I think it depends very much often on the kind of outcomes that you're looking for in your specific environment, and therefore where automation can play the biggest role and add the biggest value. We've certainly got some ways to quantify that in addition to things like the Forrester report that we'd be happy to share with you and dig into a little bit offline after the call. So we'll certainly, to the questioner who posed that question, we'll be in touch with you after the call to follow up with you on that. And of course, if anyone else who's with us today would like to dig into the discussion a bit more about building a business case and demonstrating the value for a tool like ActiveControl, we're more than happy to do that with you as well, because there's also many different areas that perhaps even the Forrester report doesn't touch on, that our customers tell us are important, but depending on their different circumstances, of course. So that's all of our questions. That just leads me to my final slide, which is essentially there to say thank you to Mary for joining us today and taking us through that experience of putting together the ActiveControl Total Economic Impact Study. Thank you to everybody on the call today for joining us in this latest Basis Technologies webinar. We certainly hope to see you on another one soon. And in the meantime, as I've said, if you'd like to know more about what ActiveControl can do, or discuss in more detail about the kind of value that ActiveControl is delivering to many of our customers as a tool, we're more than happy to do that with you. Please do get in touch either via our website, or you can see my email address on the screen there, and we'll be happy to follow up afterwards. As I've said, this is a recorded session, so we will be sending out a link to it in the next day or two. If you'd like to get that and you don't see it, do also please feel free to get in touch. In the meantime, thank you again to everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you on another Basis Technologies webinar in the future. Thanks and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.